Hello, everyone. It's Carrie Folger. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Life Brokerage Technology Committee. I'm so excited to spend some time with you this afternoon. We are hosting Brad Gabel, the Chief Underwriter from Protective Life. He's going to spend some time talking to us about accelerated underwriting and really kind of the evolution of the art and science of underwriting. Brad is the is the Vice President and Chief Underwriting Officer at Protective Life Insurance Company. In his role, he is responsible for leading underwriting and risk selection at Protective to include development, implementation, and communication of the underwriting vision and strategy. He's got 30 years of underwriting experience with extensive expertise in building, managing, and leading all aspects of life underwriting and risk selection. His areas of responsibility have included underwriting, medical, quality, and audit, research and development, claims, and reinsurance administration. Prior to joining Protective Life, he served as the Chief Underwriter at TIAA Life and AIG, and he's actually the current president of the Association of Home Office Underwriters. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Brad. If you guys have any questions, there is a question box in the bottom. Please add your question in there, and then when Brad finishes up, we will do a brief Q&A session. Thanks so much. Brad?
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Hey, I appreciate the time to talk to you, group. I am somebody that's been in underwriting, obviously, a long time. I get into this type of stuff. And in my role as the president of the Association of Home Office Underwriters, I end up talking to a lot of underwriters from a lot of different companies. And, you know, one of the topics that comes up over and over and over again is acceleration and automation. And really that leads into the agenda here. I actually gave this presentation to the Twin Cities Association in November, or a version of this, because underwriters really are really interested, obviously, in the big question: will technology replace underwriters and underwriting, and really how must underwriters evolve through this this transition period? So I definitely have some thoughts on that. And so I want to talk about the state of the affairs of accelerated underwriting as a whole, and then just kind of give some perspective from an underwriter on where we are with this and what do we need to do, how it's going to change our jobs. So everything is acceleration now. Better, faster, cheaper. It's a big part of our industry. And I look back and you look at some of the survey stuff, and some of this is dated, but I think that's helpful. You look back at a LIMRA study that was done back in 2017. This is 78 companies, and 50% of the companies at that time were either fully automated at a triage approach or partial underwriting, and then the other 41% were planning some kind of a fully automated triage underwriting or partial underwriting type of a program. And the fact that we're here today, you all know that those 41% that are planning, if you're a carrier and you don't have some kind of an accelerated underwriting program, you're really kind of not in the mainstream. And we're there, and so it's just interesting to see the evolution of this from this survey result from 2019. Another Society of Actuaries survey, they did a 2018 what they call a DELPHI survey, and at that time they ranked. This goes to actuaries with some underwriting expertise within that survey, and they asked these respondents to rank the data elements in terms of how important those are: protective value, low, medium, and high currently. And these are all things that most carriers are using in some way, shape, or form, or at least are talking about it. All the way from RX checks, which everybody is pretty much using now, all the way to the other spectrum on facial analytics that some companies have kind of taken a look at and maybe are using from some marketing perspectives and those types of things. And then they said, okay, these are the important items, but where do you see this going in 10 years? And this is where I really thought was pretty interesting to kind of look at this. One of the things that I found was interesting about this was the APS ranking of the data elements. In 10 years, there's this feeling that the APS will really not provide a lot of value. And I think the whole point to that is more electronic health records are really going to take over. And I guess we'll wait to see if that's the case. We're starting to get closer and closer on electronic health records. We're not there. We're closer with some health information exchanges and APS-like information, but it kind of indicates the evolution of that. And it'll be interesting. I'll probably hang on to the slide, and in 10 years, I plan to be here. I think underwriting is still going to be relevant in 10 years and beyond. But I want to take a look at this in 10 years and see how people might have felt with that. The other thing that I like to show is this is a slide from an SOA meeting from way back in 2015 around predictive analytics for actuaries. And the thing I like about this slide is it's a kind of a really nice snapshot of all of the different types of data categories and data vendors that were out and in existence in 2015. And keep in mind, this is 2015. You know, we're coming up on 2020, and so this has just exploded exponentially. I haven't seen one that's more current, but if you were to take this and, you know, extrapolate it out to today's date, this would be much, much larger. And you really look at all of the different types of data that are out there. And in my role with Protective Life, we really need to try to keep up on these different data vendors. We are inundated with providers throughout the industry or outside the industry that are, you know, pitching different types of data tools and those types of things. And so we need to really try to keep up with that. It's moving faster and faster and faster. So what I want to talk about a little bit around just, you know, kind of the state of automation, and really the question that comes up all the time is, you know, will an evil robot replace underwriters? And to answer that, I look back on history. So, you know, we're in the midst of what we call the fourth industrial revolution. You go back to the, you know, 1700s, we had mechanization, we had railroads and steam power, and then we moved to mass production and electrical power. Then we moved to automated production, electronics and computers in the 50s and 60s, and now we're in this fourth revolution where we're really talking about artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, and really more to come. And so there has always been industrial revolutions. There will be more that we know of. And so I think the question is really, you know, is what occupations are gonna go by the wayside. And when you look at artificial intelligence, you know, it's a study where U.S. employees weighed in on the most at-risk jobs as a result of artificial intelligence. And so you've got obviously manufacturing, retail checkouts, telemarketers, data entry. We see that today. And then you've got insurance underwriters, they're down at 5%. And I think some of that insurance underwriting thing, also, it doesn't really distinguish between life and, say, P&C underwriters. And, you know, I think a lot of the P&C underwriting pieces is a lot different in terms of the underwriting expertise that is involved and utilized throughout it. So I still think underwriting is going to be around, but it's definitely going to be different. And part of the reason I say that is I always think about, look at the leading causes of death that are out there. You know, we have heart and circulatory are huge, cancer, respiratory disorders, but I put a box around some of the things that are out there that are very, very difficult to try to automate and try to get through an accelerated underwriting program, or things that are worries to people, things like mental health disorders. Hard to get at that sometimes with some of the analytics. Accidents and suicides, whether it's a transportation accident or non-transport accidents. So you got these things that are difficult to try to get at from an automation perspective, and you know, kind of stymie us from the throughput standpoint. And then you start thinking about all the medical impairments that people might have, whether it's heart circulatory disorders, you know, those types of things. There's just a lot of different medical impairments that are out there, and new and emerging things that we have to worry about from an underwriting standpoint. And so this slide basically kind of illustrates the things that, are kind of emerging items that are, we're really struggling with as an industry to try to grapple with some of the mortality implications of it. If we were having this call even 2 years ago, I don't think we'd be having the knowledge of vaping and vape-related illnesses and tobacco issues related to vaping, opioid epidemic. We've known a lot about opioids in underwriting for a long time. We've been underwriting chronic pain, and so I think we've been ahead of the game in terms of our understanding of the dangers of opioids and people that are taking opioids along with benzodiazepines and those types of things. We've had the advent of DNA testing. How do you incorporate that into some kind of an accelerated underwriting program? We're getting into issues around data and protection and protection of data and regulation. There's some state regs out there that are kind of cycling around, I have the ability to be forgotten, and what is that going to do if we can't get at data from people? And then regulators really, taking a really strong view on black box types of programs and predictive analytics that we need to really be able to clearly trace that back to reasonably expected actuarial experience and those types of things. And then obviously you have the obesity and diabetes epidemic. So, we live in a country that is getting more and more obese and having lots of diabetes issues. And so, how do accelerated underwriting programs try to incorporate high levels of obesity and obesity-related illnesses in our insured population? That's something that we have to think about. The other impact that I see from a perspective of the industry, if you look at opioid deaths, for example, drug deaths by age, you look at this graph, where are the sweet spots for most companies' accelerated underwriting programs? It's in that 25 to 54 category, and ironically, that is the category of our population that has the highest percentage of deaths per thousand in our population. So that hits right into the sweet spot of our accelerated underwriting program. So how do we factor that in? There are a lot of things that can potentially go wrong, and things that may still be emerging in our population, where we're going to have to design programs that are flexible and adaptive to counter those types of issues that may come up. Obesity and diabetes, this is just a slide that kind of shows the correlation between obesity and diabetes. I happen to live and work in Birmingham, Alabama. It's the bacon belt, if you will, in terms of obesity and diabetes, and you can see just the progression of that and how they're so linked. So through all of this, that's my preamble that says, with all of these issues that are out there, I don't believe we're anywhere near being able to fully accelerate big swaths of people, because we have things like data protection, we have obesity and diabetes, we have medical impairments. Even if you look at information that's out there, read a study recently that talked about how the millennial group are less healthy than the previous generation. So they're worrying about things like anxiety related illnesses, stress-related illnesses, more obesity, those types of things. So really how underwriters need to evolve through this whole process is really versatility. I always look at underwriting as you're a Swiss Army knife, but now you're going to have to be a Swiss Army knife on steroids. And so when I talk to underwriters and say, how are you going to evolve through this? It's really around the lines of, what can you learn? It's not so much what you know. Learning beats knowing in this new frontier. And I think there's really 4 elements to survive and thrive in this environment. It's all around attitude, preparation, interpersonal aptitude, and then cognitive reasoning, and I kind of go through what those are. I think from an attitude perspective, hey, this is all new. I've got well over 100 underwriters at Protective, and they need to be able to embrace new ideas. They need to be able to work to build flexibility and adaptability, accept new challenges, question why. I love it when I have underwriters who come out with a new program or a new tool. We spend a lot of time trying to explain to our underwriters the why of things. It's really, really important. And so in all of this, I think the risk that underwriting shops have that they run is that it's so much complication out there in terms of the different data tools that we really need to try to make sure that we don't overthink everything. And I've done this riddle multiple times to multiple groups, and I will tell you, when I ask this question to kids, they get it right almost every single time. If you ask it to adults, they almost never get it right. So what do you sit on, sleep on, and brush your teeth with? You ask that to adults, most times they struggle with it. I got it wrong. A chair, a bed, and a toothbrush. And so when you think about it, a kid won't answer that because they don't have this over-complexity syndrome that we all deal with. And so we have to try to kind of bring it back to the thinking portion of it. So we spend a lot of time on that piece. But the other thing is the interpersonal aptitude. Communication skills are just critical. We look for underwriters that are interested in getting involved in project activity outside of case underwriting. We need to be comfortable with alternative distribution. I work at Protective. We've got an affinity channel. We've got a BGA channel. We've got a direct channel. We've got a P&C group. We've got a bank group. And so our underwriters need to be comfortable with those different distributions. And then also in this vein of learning, find a mentor, be a mentor. The other big piece is being able to work cross-functional on a team. The days of having these individual underwriting group that might, work with actuarial and distribution to come up with solutions really doesn't exist anymore. It's really integrated, and you could take this and you could expand it to include, operations and customer experience and those types of things. But it's really a fully integrated type of an approach that we need to be able to have, working hand in hand with our digital and innovation group, our data science team. I've got a data analytics group within my underwriting organization that works really, really closely with our data science and our actuarial group. And so you just have to have that level of integration. And then to me, I think the big thing really here is around cognitive ability and critical thinking. Underwriters today have to think so much differently than they have in the past. I talked about inferential-based thinking versus evidence-based thinking. What I mean by that is, in the old days, an underwriter would get a lab, they'd get a paramedical exam, they'd get an APS. That's evidence that they would look at and they would evaluate that evidence. Today, they're still doing that to a large degree, but they're also getting this inferential stuff. So I have this data product, or I have this predictive analytics tool that has mortality that's inferred to it. And that's a different part of thinking, going from that evidence-based to inferential thinking. The other piece is ability to look at larger and more complex case and developing that expertise. And complex doesn't necessarily mean high face amount. It means complex medical history to be able to handle those kickouts. If you're an underwriter and you've been working on 30-year-old soccer moms with no medical history and clean labs, and that's what you want to do, I tell them there's not going to be a job for you in this profession. You might want to think about Home Depot or someplace like that. You better start developing your expertise in larger cases and more complex cases, and then see the big picture and really you use your common sense in those types of things, especially when it comes to financial underwriting. And then finally, really the fourth piece is preparation. Continuing education. We need to be able to learn about data and analytics. We need to have a knowledge of automation and rules. Our underwriters don't have to be experts, but they need to understand the relationship between underwriting, pricing, and data science. This is a slide that you may have seen. I'm going to give a little bit extra context to this. So you all probably know or have heard that on a term policy, 75% of every premium dollar goes to pay claims. And so we have to get this stuff right. At Protective, you can say that an underwriter would probably look at make 2,000 risk decisions a year. Let's say your average face amount is 500,000. Ours is higher than that, but let's say that's what it is. That means that the average underwriter makes risk decisions on $1 billion of face amount risk every year. And so we have to get that piece right. And so how can accelerated underwriting and automation help us get that right? The other piece is just the level of competition that's out there and how tightly these products are priced. We did a reprice not that long ago where it was a 1% aggregate term rate reduction. So 1% aggregate term rate reduction. That took us from probably top 5, 30-some% of the time to top 5, 80-some% of the time. Just a 1% aggregate term rate reduction. That shows you how tightly that's priced. But take it a step further. Let's say you've got a relatively small term policy. Let's say it's a $600 annual premium term. What does that 1% equate to in real dollars on that case? And that 1% equates to 50 cents per month. And so changing the premium 50 cents per month on that $600 annual premium taken in total has that much of an impact. That just shows you how much of a commodity this term business is. And if you get the mortality piece on that wrong, you're going to be in big trouble. All right, so final thing, learning beats knowing in the new frontier. That's really the big key. Attitude, cognitive ability, interpersonal skills, preparation. Underwriters need to be a Swiss Army knife on steroids. They really need to keep up with the technology. The biggest challenge that I have in my job is to try to keep all of our underwriters up to speed, kind of give them the why, help with the flexibility and adaptability, continue to look for opportunities to get my underwriters involved more in data analytics so they understand that relationship, they understand the automation and the rules. And with that, I will turn it over to, I am going to turn it not to Carrie, but to Ben Stunkel. I'm going to change over to him as a presenter, and we'll see if there are any questions that people have.
Actually, could you hand controls over to Ben? He's going to moderate the question and answers for us very quickly, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Ben Stunkel.
Yep.
Thank you.
I thought I just did that. Ben, did you have it?
Yep, I've got it here.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, Brad. That was some really great information. And we have a question feature in the GoToMeeting. So if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and type them in. Don't have any questions just yet, but want to make sure we answer any that you might have. Well, Brad, while we're waiting for other questions, I have a question. We see quite a range between carriers of reported throughput, quote unquote, for accelerated underwriting for their term business. Based on the current state of the industry, do you have any opinion on what a good amount or the right amount of business should be considered accelerated at this point with the data sources available?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the way that I would answer that first, Ben, is it's almost impossible in my mind to make apples to apples comparisons between carriers and their throughput because there are so many different ways that throughput can be either counted or reported, and they're all right. I mean, I saw a presentation by RGA where they did a presentation. I was going to try to steal a slide, but I didn't get it, and I didn't incorporate it into this one, where they showed a graphic that showed 4 or 5 different types of throughputs, and they were all right depending upon how you define who's eligible, what's the top of the funnel, what's the control that goes through, what are your age parameters, and those types of things. So I don't know that I can really answer that. You know, I think the thing that I will say is, with the addition of new and emerging selection tools, I think it's going to continue to go up. The other problem that you see in the industry, though, is that you see some carriers really stretching, for example, on the age limits and the face amount limits. And it's one thing to say, well, we can accommodate a 65 or 70-year-old up to $5 million in our accelerated underwriting program. But the number of people in those categories that actually can pass the hurdles in terms of, not having any of these medical impairments, having a veracity of medical data that you can link to make an effective underwriting decision, really goes down the older the person gets. I think the thing that's probably going to make the biggest impact in throughput is going to be to the extent where we can get better and better real-time medical data, whether it's a health information exchange, whether it's a patient portal, whether it's a true APS that can be digitized and scored and ran through. The problem that we have in the industry right now is, in any of those types of tools that are out there, the scale and the ability to get at large groups of those, it isn't quite there yet. But I think that's probably going to be one of the bigger things that's out there. That's coming down the road.
Got another question for you. How far along do you feel carriers are with accepting electronic health records from vendors such as Cognizant and EMSI? And what do you feel are the barriers, if any, to these solutions?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we're closer and closer. I think it really depends upon the carrier's philosophy. From my particular perspective, I mean, we're looking at them. We've got some pilots. We don't have anything that I would consider really off the ground yet. And we do get medical claims billing data and CPC codes and those types of things that we incorporate, and the hit rates on those are going up. Those aren't electronic health records, but they're electronic health record-like information. And so we're getting closer and closer, and I think you've got organizations like Human API, MIB is out there, Claretto's another one. Those are probably the 3 that I think are probably the most ready for prime time. You just have to understand that in some of those cases, it's not an APS, and I think that's the other thing companies have to get comfortable with is patient portal record is not the same as an APS, and medical billing data is not the same as an APS. That's not to say that it's not valuable and that it shouldn't be used. It's just a different value proposition. You need to be able to be comfortable with that. Well, Ben, it doesn't sound like we have any more questions. We're at time here. It's the bottom of the hour. And so I'd like to just thank everybody for taking the time to listen to this. Obviously, if you have any questions, you want to talk through anything with me after the fact, it's pretty easy to get a hold of me. It's brad.gabel@protective.com. Happy to have any offline conversations with anybody that might wish to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you on behalf of the Life Brokerage Technology Committee. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.